When you walk to the edge of all the light you have and take that first step into the darkness of the unknown, you must believe that one of two things will happen. There will be something solid for you to stand upon, or you'll be taught to fly. The unknown is making itself known, like a specter or a paper tiger. It had no substance or claws. If you had reached out and touched it, your hand would have passed right through. You did not dare. What once seemed solid was just a shaky facade held together with spit and string. You held your breath so it would not topple. When it did, it turned to dust and blew away. Let us hypothesize that some trickster alien abducts an average human, and besides the usual probing and cavity violations, they bestow to them an IQ of 1,000. I'm curious about what plausible mental abilities such a being would have. One of my favorite authors, H.P. Lovecraft, stated what he thought made us human. Quote, "The most merciful thing in the world, I think, is the inability of the human mind to correlate all its contents. We live on a placid island of ignorance in the midst of black seas of infinity, and it was not meant that we should voyage far. The sciences, each straining in its own direction, have hitherto harmed us little, but someday the piecing together of dissociated knowledge will open up such terrifying vistas of reality and of our frightful position therein, that we shall either go mad from the revelation or flee from the light into the peace and safety of a new dark age." End quote. What I am pondering is someone that had mercilessness thrust upon them. To borrow from the science fiction writings of the amazing Bruce Sterling, for the purposes of this question, I will refer to a person possessing an intelligence quotient of 1,000 as having a super bright mind. Assuming that such a thing could occur in a human being, a super bright's mind would be the result of an unprecedented wiring of her or his brain's neurons into a structure similar to, but more capable than, a typical human brain. In other words, no alien cybernetic implants would be required. Is such a purely organic super bright mind physically possible? Undoubtedly. We know from numerous examples that human brains recovering from temporal lobe epilepsy, head trauma, stroke, or brain tumors can undergo significant transformations. Sometimes this results in interconnecting neurons between portions of the brain that normally are not connected. The result is a spectrum of conditions called synesthesia, which results in a variety of mental abilities that can only be described as extraordinary. Some of those different forms of synesthesia which might feature prominently in a super bright mind include 1. Grapheme color, where people see numbers shaded or tinted with colors. 2. Chromesthesia, where people, such as composers Franz Liszt and Nikolai Rimsky-Korsakov, interpret sounds with colors, resulting in their rare ability to achieve perfect pitch. 3. Spatial sequence synesthesia, where people see numerical sequences as points in space, leading to the ability to recall past events with far greater accuracy and detail. 4. Number form synesthesia, where people generate mental maps in numbers or the ability to think in numbers. 5. Mirror touch synesthesia, where people feel what they observe happening to others and as a result develop greater levels of empathy than the general population. This is important because, as I will argue, the development of extraordinary empathy would be crucial to the healthy super bright existence and social engagement. The combined effects of these forms of synesthesia, and possibly others yet to be discovered in a super bright mind, could be expected to result in an intellect capable of achieving insights or hunches and generating a more profound level of inspiration and creation. However, it would be incumbent upon a super bright mind to also logically process the tremendous cascade of sensory information resulting from such extraordinary synesthetic perceptions into more commonly understood forms. To accomplish that, it seems apparent that the super bright mind would need the ability to do at least two things simultaneously. 1. Operate multiple processing centers for the various streams of data arriving by sight, sound, touch, smell, and taste, while 2. Synthesizing those disparate data streams into a coherent mental construct that can be understood and expressed through some medium. Example, words, music, computer code, art, mathematical equations. At this point, let's take a side excursion to consider Sherlock Holmes' smarter brother. Wait, what? Had Sherlock Holmes a smarter brother? Yes, he did. His name was Mycroft. I found this out while reading Arthur Conan Doyle's collected Sherlock Holmes stories. If your only exposure to Sherlock is in the recent incarnations of TV shows, then you might have missed this fact. It was never explored fully or as expertly as Doyle intended. While Sherlock was the man about town, frenetically running around collecting field data, he and numerous others were feeding data streams to the smarter Mycroft. He would sit comfortably ensconced at his massive desk, sifting through mountains of data and using his superior intellect to form mental constructs and identify potential solutions to problems. Quote, "The conclusions of every department are passed to him, and he is the central exchange, the clearinghouse, which makes out the balance. All other men are specialists, but his specialism is omniscience." Arthur Conan Doyle. The Bruce Partington Plans. The manner in which Mycroft spent his time suggests one potential method in which a super bright intellect might realize the full range of her or his extraordinary capabilities. First, develop the world's most extensive organic repository of information, then investigate and process that data to determine interrelationships and build mental constructs from which new ideas and discoveries can flow. It is to be expected that a super bright would require extraordinary stimulation on levels exceeding anything currently imaginable in order to provide herself or himself with an environment conducive to satisfy their extraordinary intellectual curiosity. This might best be accomplished at an advanced university setting with access to cutting-edge experimental human-computer interfaces and supercomputer resources. One can envision a workstation custom designed by the superbright to ingest multiple independent or related data streams to build a vast storehouse of information for which to develop interrelationships and eventually useful mental constructs. A superbright would eventually devise the most effective way to engage all of her or his available senses to optimally ingest new data. Think of an Oculus Rift on steroids that can engage multiple parts of the body simultaneously. It might include 1. Separate visual data streams via monocles feeding the left and right eyes. Example, Mandarin language lessons via the left eye and mathematical equations via the right. 2. Separate audible data streams via headphones feeding the left and right ears. 3. Separate Braille-style data streams via Braille readers feeding as many of the fingers and or toes as the superbright's brain could process. 4. Other forms of direct data ingest to the superbright's brain that has not yet been devised by science, but might be significantly more efficient than visual, auditory, or touch senses. Naturally, it would be necessary for the superbright to have an eidetic memory, enabling nearly flawless recall for all sensed information. Yet at the same time, for the superbright's brain to avoid significant mental overload and potential psychiatric problems, you would need to be able to selectively disengage recall of that information to avoid overwhelming stimulation and enable calm, contemplation, relaxation, and sleep. Mycroft Holmes' example may also inspire us in a different manner. I see no reason to assume a superbright with an IQ of 1,000 would necessarily result in psychosis or antisocial behavior. Odd or mischievous, like Richard Feynman? Quite possibly. But disdainful and malevolent like Lex Luthor? Not necessarily. Perhaps the most socially adept of the people generally regarded as among the highest IQ ever is John von Neumann. Stories of his brilliance, and particularly his speed, are legendary. For example, George Polya had von Neumann in an advanced seminar. He wrote a theorem on the board and said that it was not proven and that the proof was likely to be extraordinarily hard. 5 minutes later, von Neumann raised his hand and went to the board and wrote a proof. He remembered everything he had ever read and could recite it in any of the languages he spoke. Nobel laureate Hans Bethe wondered if von Neumann might belong to a different species. Yet he was social, friendly, married, etc. He was fond of telling jokes and stories and had a good sense of humor. There are plenty of people, for example special needs educators, kindergarten teachers, who spend many hours a day in a room full of people whose IQ measures a fraction of their own, and they develop wisdom, compassion, and the ability to healthily interact with those people. So there's no reason why a superbright couldn't coexist peacefully in a world full of us regular IQ humans. This leads us to the question of what a person with a superbright mind might do with his or her time. Cure every form of cancer, develop easy-to-use encryption technology even the NSA could not crack, learn to speak, read, and write every known language that ever existed? Who knows? But I would hope that in the manner of John von Neumann, but with perhaps more ethical and moral suasion, the superbright's mind would engage itself in solving a bewildering variety of problems in widely disparate scientific and artistic fields. Rather than seeing the solving of previously intractable issues as an obligation or burden, it is more likely to be exactly the kind of thing someone that intelligent would crave. Near constant challenges with which to engage its full range of capabilities. In doing so, a superbright might satisfy itself and assist humanity in achieving solutions to problems previously believed to be intractable. Sometimes, the absolute best thing for a superbright with an IQ of 1,000 to do might be to spend 20 hours a day designing a biomechanical computer to redesign the human genome, to remove all of the garbage and create nearly immortal beings whose self-healing bodies are essentially impervious to physical damage and whose hormonal systems enable them to live in equanimity without impulses towards hatred, intolerance, and violence. And sometimes the very best thing for a person with an IQ of 1,000 to do might be to lay back in a hammock on Waikiki Beach with sand between their toes, not doing a damn thing except enjoying watching the palm trees waving in the trade wind breezes. In summary, a super bright person with an IQ of 1,000 or any other sufficiently high number would be a fascinating individual with truly extraordinary perceptions and logical analysis abilities that might enable them to make otherwise impossible breakthroughs in problems whose solutions may prove significant to all human beings. We've had very few people that were flashes of brilliance like described above. In time, the flashes will turn to a slow burn, and eventually to a raging flame. I just wish I would be around for this new high water mark of common intelligence.